he already beaten, asks Libération on the front page. They're basically asking if it's a sign that the president and his team have given up all hope of winning the election because he's riding so low in the polls. Is it that, or is it a PR stunt to try and win French voters around to him, make them feel a little bit more sympathetic, even make them feel sorry for him, and try and get them to vote for him by trying to humanise the president? That's what something that Libération suggests. Now, if that is their tactic, the editorial says it won't work. They say it's narcissistic, and it just shows that Sarkozy hasn't changed. He's gone from the bling-bling president, they say, to the poor little me president, complaining about the stressful job. They say French voters won't care about that. They're not interested in the future of Nicolas Sarkozy. They're just interested in the future role, the route that France will be taking into the future, which, from the state of the polls, looks like it won't be with him. He is, of course, doing very badly indeed, the paper points out. In Le Canard Enchaîné, the satirical weekly, they've got some off-the-cuff quotes from some other government ministers on this very subject, which does sound like they're not feeling very optimistic at the Élysée. They've quoted the Prime Minister, François Fillon, who apparently said if Sarkozy doesn't declare his candidacy within 2 weeks, then the game is up, which of course he doesn't plan to apparently until March, from the latest reports that we're hearing. And they also quote the Agriculture Minister, Bruno Le Maire, who apparently says our strategy has failed, and with the Front National rising on one side and the Socialists on the other, they might as well give up.
Wow, okay. Now, I would make a comment on that, but I won't. Moving on now to Turkey. It's, of course, threatening France with sanctions, reprisals for that vote in the Senate yesterday on a genocide bill.
Yes, and Le Figaro is sort of firing back against this in their editorial today. They've got calming down things over the Armenian genocide as a headline there. They basically are taking up the cause of those French politicians who voted for that law, saying that, while they might have had their thoughts of the future election and, of course, those 500,000 Armenian voters in the back of their minds, that doesn't necessarily make it a bad law. And they attack quite strongly the Turkish Prime Minister, who accused France of committing genocide in Algeria in the 1960s, saying that laying out other people's historical records doesn't excuse your own.
Now, one of the main themes touted by politicians in the run-up to the presidential election is trying to encourage people to buy made in France, and La Croix is looking at that today.
Well, they're asking if it's actually possible. A couple of their journalists have been out to try and buy products made in France, which of course is what all the main 4 presidential candidates want people to do. They're trying to encourage companies to produce things in France. But it turns out it's virtually impossible. They attempted to go and buy a bicycle that was made in France, but found there's only one company who does them. And they also have factories in Italy and Portugal, so when you buy it in the shop, you can't know where it's made. And if you're trying to buy clothes made in France, they could be made of, say, fabric from India and then sewn together in Turkey. But as long as they've been embroidered or finished in France, according to the paper, they can still be sold under a Made in France label. Le Monde is also having a look today at one of the major clothes companies that until very recently still did make clothes in France, the lingerie band Les Habits. Now, they've decided to move their production to Tunisia and China, so Le Monde has been to visit their one remaining factory in the Loire, where they were still producing lingerie until very recently. Now, of course, the women there will lose their jobs, and Le Monde says most of them are in their 50s. They won't get another job again, and they blame brands like H&M and Etam for selling bras for €10 for destroying the craftsmanship that, of course, used to go into making a bra, which is a complex piece of engineering, as the paper points out.
You can still get, though, wine and cheese 100% made in France, at least. Now, moving on to one of the candidates for First Lady has given her first big interview in the press.
Yes, François Hollande's girlfriend Valérie Trierweiler, who's of course a former political journalist for Paris Match and the woman for whom Hollande left Ségolène Royal, the party's candidate in the last presidential election. She's given her first big interview in his Le Parisien. That's because she's launching a talk show this weekend where she's going to be interviewing celebrities. So she tells the paper that just because she's not exactly impartial in political journalism anymore, that doesn't mean that she can't still work as a journalist and be on TV. And she says she's going to avoid any questions about her private life, or indeed any of the questions the journalists try and ask her about what she would do if she was First Lady. They ask her if she would live in the Élysée and things like that, and she avoids them quite cleverly. But for how long she's going to be avoiding those questions, of course, or whether or not she'll still be interviewing celebrities after the 6th of May, we've got to wait and see.
From interviewing politicians to celebrities. Sometimes that's one and the same, though, isn't it? All right, thanks very much for that look at the French press, Elena. You're watching live from Paris. A reminder now of our top stories. Barack